Okay, today we're going to introduce you to microeconomics. We're going to cover the following topics. What are the key themes of microeconomics? The role of theories and models. And we'll talk about positive economics and normative economics and the difference between the two. We'll talk about what a market is, and what is the difference between real and nominal prices. And finally, we'll ask and answer, why study microeconomics? So we begin by discussing the themes of microeconomics. One of the most important themes in microeconomics is scarcity. Now, you've probably heard the definition of economics, that economics deals with the allocation of scarce resources among conflicting uses to satisfy human wants. So really, economics, as you probably already know, is all about scarcity, and microeconomics is certainly no exception. In microeconomics, we deal with the fact that individuals have limited budgets, they have limited time, and firms may have a limited ability to produce, given limits on their resources. So one of the big questions that we'll be asking is, how do we make the most of what we've got? How do we allocate scarce resources? Now, talking about scarcity naturally leads us to the question of trade-offs. Workers, firms, and consumers all must make trade-offs given that we face scarce resources. So, for example, a person who has a job needs to ask themselves, should I work this week or should I go on vacation? If I work, I can make extra money. If I go on vacation, I'll enjoy myself, but I can't have both. A consumer must ask questions such as, do I purchase a new car or do I save my money? And a firm must ask itself questions such as, well, should we hire more workers or should we buy new machinery? So all these questions are very typical questions in microeconomics, and they all deal with the trade-offs that workers, firms, and consumers must make. So let's focus a little bit more on the players in microeconomics, starting with consumers. Consumers, they're characterized by limited income, and we deal with consumers through a body of economics called consumer theory that describes how consumers maximize their well-being using their preferences to make decisions about the trade-offs that they face. Trade-offs, for example, such as the trade-off between consumption and savings, and the trade-off of one good for another. So consumers are deciding, for example, should I save the money that I just earned, or should I spend it on something I want to get? And if I spend it on goods rather than saving it, what should I spend it on? So these are the very sort of typical problems that consumers face, and as you can see, they have to do with trade-offs. Okay, so we'll also talk about workers in microeconomics. Although actually in this course, we're probably not going to have a chance to focus on them. We're mainly going to be focusing on consumers and firms, and we'll leave the discussion of workers for another course, perhaps a course in labor economics. But let's just briefly introduce the workers. Workers are individuals who work, and they face decisions that they must make also. They must face the decision of when and if to enter the workforce. And they're, of course, implicit in that as a trade-off of the benefit of working now and earning money, or obtaining more education and training, and therefore being able to make more money later on. So individuals have a number of choices to make in terms of the jobs that they may choose, if they do choose to work, and the workplaces that they'll work in. And they also face the decision of how many hours they may want to work, and this incorporates a trade-off between labor and leisure. And then we have firms. Firms face a number of decisions. For one thing, they must decide what types of products they want to produce. And a firm, of course, can't produce every product it wants, and it can't produce an infinite quantity of products. It must make choices, and these choices, of course, are governed by constraints on the firm's production capacity and its financial resources. The theory of the firm is the body of economics, of economic thought that describes how these trade-offs are best made. Now, an important thing that will come up again and again, not just in this course, but really in every course that you take in economics, is the notion of a price. Prices are central to the allocation of resources in economics. In fact, trade-offs are often based upon the prices that consumers and producers face in the marketplace. Workers also must make decisions based upon the prices that they face for labor, which we call wages. Firms make decisions based upon the wages that they have to pay to workers, the prices that they have to pay for other inputs, and on the prices of the goods, which we'll call outputs, that they produce. Now, how are prices determined? It depends really on the type of economy that we're talking about. In centrally planned economies, communist countries, for example, the governments decide what the prices are going to be. In market economies, which really make up almost all of the economies in the world today, prices are determined freely by the interaction of market participants. Now, actually, I think it's fair to say that even though we think of most economies as being market economies, really most are sort of a hybrid. They're somewhere between being pure market economies and having some degree of planning or regulation involved in them. So when you have a market like ours, which functions for the most part freely, the government does step in and sometimes control what prices will be for certain industries or in certain situations. And so even though we have a market economy, we do have some limits placed on it that make it in some ways a little bit like a centrally planned economy. Now, markets, and this is where we will first define that term, which you will hear again and again in this course and in your other courses in economics, consists of a collection of buyers and sellers whose interaction determines the prices of goods. And we will talk more about markets later on. Now, economics is concerned with the explanation of observed phenomena. So when we talk about economics, what we're trying to do is explain. It's a social science, and we're trying to explain what's happening out there. We're trying to explain how people make decisions having to do with goods or services or the amount of time that they work or the jobs that they are taking. And in order to explain the phenomena that we observe out there in the world, we need to develop some ideas about it. And we call these ideas theories. Theories are used to explain observed phenomena in terms of a set of basic rules and assumptions, and examples include the theory of the firm and the theory of consumer behavior. Theories are used in economics to make predictions. In fact, economic models, which you'll hear a lot about, are created from theories, and models are really mathematical representations of theoretical concepts that are used to make quantitative predictions. So now, here's where economics really kind of gets a bad rap. You'll hear a lot of people say that economics is very theoretical, that it's built too much around models. But really, theories and models give us good ways of making predictions, and in fact, making very specific and quantitative predictions. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the pros and cons of theories and models as we go along. Okay, well, an important aspect to developing a good theory is being able to validate it. The validity of a theory is determined by the quality of its predictions, given its assumptions. And to ensure that we have a good theory, theories must be tested and refined. Now, as I said before, economics really does kind of get a bad rap, and that has to do with people saying, oh, you know, it's just way too theoretical. Economists aren't talking about reality, they're just talking about their models. Well, it's true. Economic theories do not perfectly describe reality. They're invariably imperfect, but they do give us some insight into observed phenomena. So even though a theoretical model might not be an exact description of reality, it does give us some insight, and that's why we use them.